As a career yoga teacher and studio owner, one of the bigger challenges that we have is trying to make yoga more accessible to more people. More accessible financially, more accessible in terms of hours and class offerings, more accessible in terms of different body types in different stages of life. And this is a big challenge, right? It's Friday night and you've got a class at 7 p.m. How do you make a class that's appropriate for a 22-year-old college student, but also appropriate for a 73-year-old retiree, and also appropriate for someone who's struggling with cancer or another chronic illness? The answer is you can't. You have to create separate classes and separate approaches, but at the same time, we want to create an inclusive community. These are really complex questions, but in a community-based practice like yoga, it's an important question. It's something I've worked on a lot, and I'd like to learn more about. My guest on this week's show has really dedicated his career to making yoga accessible. In fact, he calls it accessible yoga. If you're new here, this is the Lucas Rockwood Show. On this podcast, I go out into the world of health and wellness, and I find people who are medical doctors or yoga teachers or researchers or nutritional experts. I try to bring their best work to you here to inspire you, to educate you and myself so that we can all live better lives. If you like the show, leave me a rating and review on iTunes. It's the best way to support me. If you have a question, if you'd like to be featured on the show, or if you just want to connect, find me on Instagram. It's just Lucas Rockwood. I answer all of my messages personally. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the show. So hello and welcome. Today's show is called Yoga for All Bodies, All Abilities, and I am joined here with Jivana Heyman. Jivana is the founder of and the director of Accessible Yoga. He's the co-owner of Santa Barbara Yoga Center. He has a passion for making yoga accessible to everyone. He's led over 40 different yoga teacher training programs and created the Accessible Yoga Teacher Training Program back in 2007. Has a new book called Accessible Yoga. It's available on Amazon and also on his website. We'll link up in the show notes to all of these different resources. Jivana, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I've been teaching yoga, I guess, since 2003 and training teachers about the same as you since 2006 or something like that. And one of the common issues that comes up, well, I don't want to call it an issue. One of the common situations that comes up is teachers want to work with different body types. And it all gets lumped into one category. You know, they kind of think of their normal yoga classes, drop-in yoga class. Let's just call it a Friday 7 p.m. class at a local studio. And then maybe we could call it like alternative, or I love your term, accessible yoga. The challenge that I find is it rolls up quite a lot of different people into one category. So, for example, for many years I worked with obese clients, people who are carrying really, really lots of extra weight, which really limited them in terms of their yoga practices. In my programs, we have a lot of vets, and they work with people with PTSD, which would be different kind of mental challenges, and then a lot of people who have amputees and things like this. We have a lot more graduates now working with aging communities, so they're working in elder care facilities where even standing poses are out of the question. And where I'm going with this is all those different communities I've just mentioned are very, very different. How do you help your teachers? How do you think about targeting these? How do you think about teaching these groups of people? Because you can't just throw a 30-year-old client who's struggling with weight problems in with a 60-year-old war veteran who's got a partial amputee on the right leg. How do you think about this in one category, but at the same time teaching to the specific student?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's kind of what my training is focused on, actually, is really looking at how do we address that issue of, which is the fact that every yoga class that we teach is a mixed level group. You know, so even if people might look the same, you don't really know what's going on with people inside. And actually, in the U.S., there was a recent survey that they said 1 out of every 4 Americans has a disability. So basically, even if you don't see that, it's happening in your class. There's definitely people with disabilities there. Like you said, some are invisible disabilities, some are very obvious. And so to me, this is an essential conversation and really important question. How do you serve all your students and teach and keep them safe, I think, and not just safe, but offer them something that's useful to them. And so that's really I'd say the main focus of my work is trying to help teachers understand that. And there's not one simple answer, but I think there's a few things I could mention. One in particular is just that teaching asana instead as like one thing, but rather as like I always call it a spectrum of possibilities. Shifting our idea of like a peak pose or like one like real version of the pose, whatever that might be. That's just not. It's not really based on anything. You know, it's kind of been created just through the last maybe, I don't know, 100 years that we have these certain asanas that we do a certain way. But I think if you go back to what yoga is, really more of an inner with yourself, peace of mind, and then you think of mostly about wanting to keep people safe and not cause more harm or injury. I think you just kind of can let go of some preconceived ideas and work instead on, like, what is the essence of this practice? Why do we do it? You know, look at each asana, like, what is the point here? What are we trying to get at? You know, is it a back bend? Are we trying to get some opening in the front of the body? How can I bring that to mixed level group? And then I think there's some real specific skills that teachers need actually to teach a mixed level class. You know what I mean? I've watched a lot of teachers over the years, and I've trained a lot of teachers too, and I see that experienced teachers figure it out eventually, like that they have to learn how to teach different levels at the same time, and new teachers tend to struggle. But there's some like skills you can use to do that, and I think one skill is to really think about preparation of a pose separately from the practice. I don't know if you want me to, I can kind of explain. So basically, like, what I normally see happening is that, say you have a mixed level class, you would say, okay, you can practice this way, or you can practice this way, and you offer it almost as separate things. And I think that tends to divide the group into different levels almost. You know, you kind of, okay, you guys over here do this, and then you over here do this. And instead of that, I think it's important to try and create an experience that's more connected within the space, and, you know, more like a integrated experience. So I like to focus instead on preparation, separate preparation. So I would say, like, say for example, sitting in a chair, and other students on the mat, you could prepare separately. The foundation of the pose might be different, but then the practice, is there some aspect of the practice that you could find that's universal that you could do together?
The motto that we always have is, like, focus on the practice, not the pose. And everybody is just, you know, obsessed with what the pose is supposed to look like rather than what it's supposed to feel like. And, you know, unfortunately, we do live in a day and age where a lot of people are taking photos and sticking them on Instagram. But for most of us, we're not trying to get on Instagram. You know, it's Friday night. We're trying to go to yoga class, and we want to feel some peace or some balance or some opening or some strength or some whatever people are looking for. And you get that through the feeling, not the external look. And nobody's looking. You know, it's interesting as a yoga teacher. You know, the students always assume that you put people into categories as, like, beginner or advanced, and I never make that distinction in my mind. It's kind of irrelevant. I just like the people with a good practice, and a good practice has nothing to do with what the poses look like. It's the people who are practicing, and they're integrated, and they're mindful, and they're connected to their body. The one challenge that I have with this is, you know, we teach. I've always taught really wide groups of people. So I'll give you two specific examples. Back in many years ago, but I was teaching a big class in Hong Kong, very big, like 55 students. So we used to just have these massive classes. And I go to adjust a student in down dog, and I realized that she has a prosthetic leg. And I thought, that's interesting. And so I realized, like, she just wants to come to class, and she just wants to go to class, or she would have come and talked to me, or somebody would have talked to me. And that's what she wanted. She just wanted to come to class and be a yoga student. She didn't want to be given special modifications. She wanted to do her own thing. And so it was perfect. She did great. And, you know, everything was fine. Probably I was the only one in class who noticed. And then I have the other situation, which is actually a lot more common, where somebody comes up and they just are desperate to be, I don't know how to phrase it except condescended to. They want to be put into a category of beginner or remedial or broken or damaged. And I find it really difficult as a teacher to juggle the two roles. So I'll give you two identical situations. The amputee thing doesn't play the other way, but I did a retreat about 3 years ago, and I had two women show up to the retreat who were very, very heavy. Probably both of them were over 350 pounds. And they hadn't disclosed that prior, and it was a really athletic retreat and pretty intensive retreat. A lot of hiking, actually, and a lot of walking and stuff. And same sort of thing as the student who was an amputee. I thought, you know, they just want to come to a yoga retreat, so let's do it. And same thing. I was really they totally did everything, and they were not obese students. They were just students. And on the flip side, I have people come to courses all the time who are nowhere near 350 pounds. They're maybe carrying an extra 30 pounds or 40 pounds, and they can't stop talking about their weight. They can't stop talking about how they're broken. They need a special modification, and they're too old, and I really struggle with this, because as yoga teachers, people pay for a lot of things when they pay us, but they pay for motivation, and they pay for they borrow your motivation for the hour and a half they're with you. They borrow your skills and your ability. And sometimes it's difficult to know. Sometimes, with those students who are asking to be treated as if they're broken, and it's so clear that they're not, it's difficult to know, does this person really need a modification, a chair, this or that, or do they need me to kind of, to use like public school terms, just like mainstream someone, just plop them in and let them see what happens. I'm curious how you think about that.
There's a couple of things I think of. One is the way we've defined advanced yoga in our minds. I think it's worth questioning that. I think that's kind of one of the questions that you brought up. Is like, what does it mean to be advanced student, and what does it mean to be advanced at yoga? And I think you were kind of saying that it's not. We're not really judging students in that way. Like, we're not there to be a judge of advanced or not advanced. But I also think that there's a misunderstanding from the general public about advanced asana, that just because you can do some, extreme physical practice, that means you're advanced at yoga. I think that's more to me like gymnastics or calisthenics or something like that. I mean, that's great, but that doesn't mean you're advanced at yoga, which to me is, like I mentioned, or yoga is, according to any yogic text that you find, is more about the way you think. Where's your mind at? How can you focus? Can you be at peace with yourself? And it doesn't, because like the fact is, like, all of us are going to get sick and eventually die. So it's like the physical goal of like being perfect or advanced in a physical way, I think, is limited and not really yoga. And the physical practice is a beautiful and important part of yoga. That's just one part. So I just think it's important for yoga teachers to keep that in mind and to tell us, like, I like to teach people that, like, don't hurt yourself, because that pushing your body into that asana isn't more advanced. Actually, the more sensitive you are, the more aware you are, that's yoga. The more focused you can be, that's yoga. And those two things may be related, but I often say, really, there's no relationship there. I've seen very advanced yogis who are very sick, or who have serious injuries, or who are dying, and that's how I started. I started working with people with HIV/AIDS, and many who were dying at a young age, and often people felt like a failure. And I just feel like that's something I think that you're getting at too, which is like, society is often telling us that we're failing, disability or chronic illness or something. And I like to fight against that. Like, I think you're right to question that. Why do people want to, pigeonhole themselves and see themselves as a failure? Like, that's kind of what you're getting at. Like, that students are coming to and being like, I'm so bad, I need help, and all that. So I think that's a lot of what yoga can do, is like reframe that, like, inner dialogue. And like, is that really, why do you feel that way? Is that society telling you that? Is that true? Like, what is the goal here? What is the goal of yoga? Is it like physical perfection? I don't think it is, So anyway, I think they're really important questions that you bring up. I wish all yoga teachers were thinking about those things, and I worry sometimes that we're not, that we're perpetuating something that's really more in line with, like, I don't know, like with the capitalist system of trying to sell stuff, and marketing, rather than really looking at what is this practice about?
One of the challenges that I see right now in the industry is a lot of people are calling themselves healers and therapists, and they're not. And I was recently interviewed on some kind of wellness series or something, and the interviewer said, "So, at what point did you know that you were a healer?" And I said, "Whoa, like, who said I'm a healer? Like, I teach people how to breathe. I teach people how to, like, do some, like, I don't treat or cure. I don't diagnose people." But people use that term really recklessly, and I say that because I've been in studios for a long time, and people walk in with their umbilical cord in their hand, and they want to be healed. They want to plug in to mama, and like, as a yoga teacher, you got to really hold space, or it's dangerous. I mean, people walk in very unstable mentally. They walk in making really irresponsible decisions physically. I mean, I have the most common situation that happens to me at least every 3 months is somebody who's pregnant and never done yoga is trying to talk their way into some very athletic program. It's like somebody who's like 1 day post-op on a back surgery or a knee surgery, and they're trying to get into a class, and it's like and I never position myself as a healer or a therapist or anything like this, but these terms are getting kicked around a lot, and Yoga Alliance is getting a lot of flack for it. But I was like, Yoga Alliance doesn't do a lot of things that I'm proud of, but they held their ground on that and said, stop calling yourselves therapists, and I really appreciated that. And I'm just curious how you think about this, because as soon as you get into accessible yoga, immediately you're dealing with PTSD, you're dealing with amputees, you're dealing with chronic illness, you're dealing with diabetes, all kinds of things. How do you help people really hold space ethically?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say I've thought a lot about it, honestly. I am a yoga therapist by training, but I used to train yoga therapists, but then at some point I realized that what you're saying, which is I'm not interested in being the healer, being the therapist. And I think yoga therapy is an unfortunate choice of title for what I think they're doing. I think yoga therapy, really, the way I see it and the way I've seen it done well, is really just deep yoga teaching, like where people are willing to work with you kind of one-on-one and help you like create a practice on your own and explore what's going on in a deeper way. Unfortunately, it's not always practiced correctly, and I think then it's like you said, it can be used as a form of therapy or healing, which is not right, because yoga is an internal, personal practice, and we do people a disservice when we take on the role of healer for them. You know, we're disempowering them, actually. So I think you're totally right to focus on that point, that it's not our job to heal or cure anyone. And actually, accessible yoga really came out of that desire for me to empower people instead. So the idea of accessible yoga is just making the practices accessible to people to use themselves. You know, I'm not doing yoga therapy when I'm teaching accessible yoga. It's almost the opposite, actually, because yoga therapy is very much about an individualized approach. You know what I mean? Like you would go to a yoga therapist and they'd find out like your medical information and your background and all that. That's not really what they do in accessible yoga. I'm looking at how can yoga teachers, general yoga teachers, make their classes accessible to everyone and safe. That's what I'm interested in. And that's different than therapy. That's just more like how can you include people and be welcoming in a sense. Like open to communities that want yoga, but that might feel excluded. And some of those exclusions are also based on other issues like that are societal issues like racism and homophobia and ableism and things like this. Like I think those are a lot of the issues that I'm interested in addressing in accessible yoga. Is like how do those societal issues creep into our yoga spaces, and we need to address them, so that people can be welcome there, everyone, so that everyone can have access to these practices, which are healing, but like you said, not from somebody else, healing. Heal
yourself.
Practice them ourselves.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So in terms of being an inclusive space, one of the things that I've really struggled with in recent years is a lot of my friends and colleagues and people are trying to get yoga more and more into different communities, into the public sector, into hospitals, trying to mainstream into schools and things. And a lot of us in the yoga community have this neo-Hindu, neo-Buddhist tilt to things, whether it's terminology, whether it's names, whether it's chants, whether it's mantras. And there's kind of this assumption that that's cool and that's okay and that that's inclusive because somehow we've made peace with it or we're accepting of it. And I don't know. If you're a Christian living in the South, I don't know that that's cool. I don't know if that's inclusive. If you're a Muslim living in New York City, I don't know that you want your kids going and doing an invocation before they do a yoga class in their physical education class. And so I where I'm going with this is part of accessible yoga. I'm curious how you think about, how do you make it inclusive spiritually? Because traditionally, at least for the past 50 years, the majority of the Western yoga movement has been Neo-Hindu, Neo-Buddhism, pretty fuzzy lines between where religion and philosophy meld together. And to be fair, I think a lot of the teachers themselves are pretty confused about where they stand on things.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's two sides to it, actually. One is I do think we need to be respectful of the roots of yoga, and that doesn't mean, though, that we can't adapt the practice to make it appropriate for our students or our audience. So I think those two things need to be balanced. Personally, I think we need to have a sense of where does yoga come from? It does come mostly from India, although now there's conversations about, well, actually there's African roots to these practices or other indigenous communities that may have found similar teachings, but really, the yoga we're teaching is coming from India. It is connected to Hinduism only because that was also there in that same space. It's connected to Buddhism because it had a lot of cross-contamination, is that the word, with Buddhist teachings. But I think it's important for yoga teachers to be conscious of that and to be trained in the history and philosophy of these teachings so they can teach yoga in a respectful way. And I think that's what, I don't know if you've heard the term cultural appropriation, but that's the danger, of not doing that, of not being respectful to the roots, is actually that you just use the teachings for your own profit without really having respect and understanding that these are indigenous practices from communities that tend to be marginalized. But at the same time, you're totally right that we need to make them appropriate. And so there's no reason then it doesn't mean you have to chant. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean you have to use Sanskrit. It doesn't at all. It means you need to understand the roots of yoga and at the same time learn how to be sensitive to the people you're actually teaching, because that's also a kind of cultural insensitivity, is to force something on a community that's not interested. So it's hard. It's a hard balance. I think yoga teachers have a hard job.
Yeah, for me it's a big deal, and I love all this stuff. I love chanting. I spent a bunch of time in Buddhist monastery. I love all this stuff, but at the same time, like I as time went on, as I spent more time and more, I've lived in 4 or 5 different countries, and I realized like this is not like everyone's not on this sort of cultural journey that I am, and everyone doesn't have this same worldview. And again, like to use that example, like a Muslim mom living in New York City, sending her kid to a yoga class at public school, does she really want her kid chanting to Shiva? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with her saying no to that. And yet a lot of us yoga teachers are kind of force feeding that. And you look at these like yoga journal conferences, and they have like a big smiling, goofy Buddha up on stage along with a dancing Shiva. And I guess when I think of cultural appropriation, that's kind of what I think of in the Om symbols on the mats. You'd never step on an Om symbol, and yet yoga students have them on their mats, and they put in yoga studios, they have Shivas in the bathroom and Ganesh is by the incense on the floor, and it's just like it's all backwards. It's like wearing an upside down. It's like I grew up in a Christian background. It's like wearing an upside down cross or something, or the story that I always tell is I lived in Thailand for many years, and this was probably 2005, 2006. It was like a trend for teenage Thai girls to wear crucifixes in Bangkok, just as like a fashion symbol. I don't know. It's probably from some R&B star or something like that. And it was interesting because I lost my religion a long time ago, but I found it just like tremendously offensive. I was like, how can they do that? I was like, my uncle's a priest, my family are deep in, this is like a real thing. And then I realized like, oh, I'm doing this. I have a silly little Buddha statue in my bedroom. I'm mixing up Hindu deities in my chants. I'm the goofball, like mispronouncing Sanskrit in class. And I realized like, it really made me put myself in check. And I was like, I'm doing this. I'm that goofball, and it really made me rethink things. And I get a lot of flack in the yoga community, but I was like, there's a lot of us who are doing this stuff, and with all the best intentions, like we are totally leveraging, like you said, marginalized communities without fighting the good fight, without even really understanding what we're doing. And that part is mostly just embarrassing. Like me as a goofball trying to chant kirtan and mispronouncing stuff, that's just embarrassing. But what's not embarrassing, what's really a shame, is when public school systems lock yoga teachers out of systems, when, public sector money is not getting designated simply because we're not able to separate church and state. We're not able to recognize, like, hey, this, like, for some people this is offensive and that's cool. I want to make this accessible. Let me pull back what may be construed as religion. Whether it is or not is to be determined. But I feel like a lot of people get stuck on this, and I feel like it's something that people need to talk about more. Yeah,
I totally agree. I appreciate what you said. Being a goofball, I feel that way myself too sometimes. And I think the answer though is to teach what you feel comfortable with, that you really feel like you know with confidence. I mean, to study well, and also then to refer out to other teachers and other people who might know more than you. And I think that's, to me, it comes back to kind of like a capitalist approach. I mean, in a way, which is like trying to get more for myself instead of approaching yoga, not just practicing yoga on your mat, but then actually living your life that way and running your business that way, which is to lift up other teachers. And I feel like that's a lot of what we do with our nonprofit, is we try to lift each other up and support each other. So like if someone's interested in chanting, I know a million yoga teachers who are experts at that, and they can go study with them, and I'll refer you to them, or I'll share their work and support them. And I'll study with them myself. I think that's the thing. It's just to be like, to try to get the ego. In fact, ego is the theme for me in yoga, is that I think the practice generally is about really looking at our ego and trying to keep it in check. Not that it's a bad thing, but just understand that an ego unchecked can bring us a lot of unhappiness and pain. And to me, yoga is about, reducing suffering. And that really goes back to my ego and the way I let it run wild or not. And the more I can serve, think of yoga as service, which means I don't do it for my own selfish motives, the happier I'll be in the end, actually. And the more good, hopefully, I'll be able to do in the world.
So you've got this book, and a book is a big project. Tell people a little bit about your book, what you're hoping to achieve with it, and where they can connect with you.
Yeah, the book is, it's just kind of a summary of some of the teaching I've been doing the last 25 years, actually, about making yoga accessible. And my background has mostly been with people with physical disabilities. So in the book, there's a lot of asana in there. It's a lot of adapted practice, yoga in chairs, yoga in bed, adapted on the mat. And then a little kind of introduction to my journey and the philosophy that we use in accessible yoga, which is just really trying to get to, I'll say, I think yoga is by nature accessible. That the basic fundamental teachings are everyone. And I think it's just that the way we teach sometimes is not accessible. So I've tried to share that in the book, that there is a essential practice, an essential, teaching to yoga that we can all relate to. So I try to share that there. And I lead accessible yoga trainings, and we have our nonprofit runs conferences. We have accessible yoga conferences. We move around. Actually, we were in Europe, in Germany 2 years ago, and we'll probably be back in London in 2021. But we'll be in Portland, Oregon, in October of this year. We're also doing a summit event, Evolution of Yoga Summit, with the Yoga Service Council, supported by Yoga Alliance, actually, trying to address some of these harder questions in yoga, like what cultural appropriation and racism and consent and accessibility. So really trying to look at, we need to talk about these things more. That's the main thing.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate Yoga Alliance too. People give them such a hard time in the yoga industry. Just like people don't understand how these things work. Like Yoga Alliance is this tiny nonprofit. They hardly make any money. They struggle. Like their website barely works. They have this idea that there's like some guy riding around in a BMW or something. It's like people don't realize these nonprofits, they have to publish their financial statements. You can go take a look at it. These guys aren't making any money. It's poor guys. They're trying to run this thing. They're not doing a great job, but hey, you know what? Neither are you and I. We're just doing our best job, And
one good thing I'll say, one good thing about Yoga Alliance is they're about to release a code of conduct, which is like an ethical guidelines, and scope of practice. And I think that's really going to help the yoga community. Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's like people are so critical, and and I'm just like, what have you done? You know what I mean? I've done a lot of stuff. You've done a lot of stuff, but what have you done? Like, if you want to go build a nonprofit and try to be a voice in this market, this hard. It's hard. They have a lot of faults, but give them some credit. And so,
Yeah,
I don't know.
exactly.
I try to be a supporter, and the Yoga Alliance professionals in the UK too. I really appreciate what they're doing. All these organizations have faults, but all of our organizations also have faults. I just appreciate that somebody is doing this. This is like a really thankless job, and all the forums and things people are just getting the Yoga Alliance just gets slagged all day long. And it's just like, oh come on, it's like I don't know. Somebody's out there trying to do some good, and I'm really hopeful that in the future there'll be a lot more oversight, a lot more potentially even real accreditation. But I'm optimistic. Let's see what happens.
It's easy to criticize, and I think it's better to focus on the positive and try and see, like what good is coming out of that, and then also, like you said, do the work yourself. Like let's all work on these issues. If something's really bothering you, figure out how can you address that issue. What are there organizations dealing with that, and then support them. So I mean, I think it's a practice. That's what yoga is about. Is to work on yourself first before you blame others.
Well, I appreciate your work. I appreciate you coming on the show. I always have people asking me for resources for accessible yoga. I haven't used this term now. I'm going to use your phrase and refer people to your book because my teachers are always looking for resources. So I'm glad to connect with you, and let's keep in touch for the future. If you have a back problem, back pain, or limited range of motion, limited mobility, and you go to a yoga teacher, it's very likely that yoga teacher will give you 3 yoga poses to fix your back. If you go to a strength and conditioning coach, like a personal trainer, they'll very likely give you 3 different lifting exercises to work on to strengthen your posterior chain. And if you go to a physiotherapist, they'll probably have you stand on a Bosu ball and do some weird balancing exercises. And the question is, for someone who's just trying to fix their back, heal their back, and have a youthful spine, who's correct? The answer is all 3. If we look at spinal health, it comes down to strength, flexibility, and balance, all 3. And when we go to specialists, they tend to see the world through their lens. To the hammer, everything is a nail, and that's just not really true. So when you're working on your own spinal health, you always need to work on strength, flexibility, and balance, ideally concurrently at the exact same time. I'm mentioning this because my 14-day backbend challenge starts very soon. This is our second round. We had a couple hundred students last time. We just had a really great experience. How it works is every day on Instagram, I do a live video. I'll talk right to you, and I'll walk you through some strength, balance, flexibility exercises every single day. It's about 15 minutes per day commitment. You can ask me any question you like, and we'll go through this together. By the end of the program, your spine will definitely be more mobile. You'll feel more braced and more supported with your posture, and hopefully you'll find an improvement in your balance as well. You can read testimonial stories from students who did the last course, and you can learn more if you go to yogabody.com or else yogateacherscollege.com and check for our backbend challenge, 14-day backbend challenge. Hope you can join us. Great question from Benny R. Benny says, Lucas, coronavirus is all over the place, as you of course know. I've heard that taking garlic can be helpful for boosting your immune system because it's antiviral. Is this true? Should I take garlic, and if so, in which form? Benny, I appreciate the question. So garlic has a compound in it called allicin, and allicin, yes, is antiviral, antibacterial, and it's pretty strong. The challenge is it's not very stable, so when you extract allicin, it loses most of its potency. When you cook garlic, it loses most of its potency. So basically, you'd have to eat a whole pile of raw garlic, like let's say 2 to 3 cloves a day to start getting an active dose. That's a lot of garlic. You'll stink like high hell, but even probably more disturbing is it can disrupt your sleep. It can disrupt your concentration. In traditional Ayurveda, garlic is usually contraindicated for most constitutions. At most meditation centers, garlic is often contraindicated. And so for long-term use, I don't think it's very practical. No one will want to be around you, and you might feel a little bit jittery. Many people haven't really experienced raw garlic in its full potency. Cooked garlic is a totally tame thing compared to raw garlic. If you have 2 to 3 cloves of raw garlic, let's imagine it was smeared on some toast or something like that. Or let's say it was mixed into a cold salad. I used to do this a lot in my raw food days. It really affects you in terms of your energy levels. It's kind of this wired but tired feeling. It's difficult to describe. It's not like coffee jitters, but your brain feels pretty scrambled and people can smell you from across the house. So I don't think it's the most practical thing. And like I mentioned, the extracts aren't the most potent of things. In the short term, it can be effective. I know a number of people who, when they get a virus or they get the flu or something like that, they start to eat a lot of garlic. That might be a little more effective. Your housemates will probably tolerate you stinking for a few days when you're sick. But long term, I don't know if it's the greatest thing. Definitely to include some garlic in your diet, especially cooked garlic is a little bit more manageable. The active allicin levels are going to be quite a bit lower, but it still offers something. In terms of other things to think about with your immunity, there aren't a lot of things that are proven. So of course, anecdotally, people take echinacea, vitamin C, zinc, and vitamin D3. Of all of those, the most interesting research is probably with vitamin D3, zinc, echinacea, and vitamin C in that order. So I'll say that again, vitamin D3, zinc, echinacea, and vitamin C. And so let's say you were taking vitamin D3, and it's the wintertime, you're low, and almost everybody is low. You might take anywhere from 2 to 5,000 international units a day, or maybe even, like right now, I'm taking 10,000 international units per day. It's a good idea to get a blood test to see where you're at. But for most people, that's a totally reasonable dose in the winter, and it will still get you up to just normal levels, 10,000 IUs a day. In terms of zinc, really great one to supplement as well, and pretty good efficacy shown for boosting your immune system. Echinacea, the data is a little bit more mixed, but particularly if you start to come down with something, you probably shouldn't take echinacea all the time or it'll lose its efficacy. And vitamin C is probably the most well-known immune booster, but the research again isn't that solid, but it seems to be pretty good for overall health. So somewhere between 500 milligrams and 1 gram per day. I like to take it buffered with calcium or magnesium or something so it doesn't upset your stomach so much. But that might be a good way to go. And of course, just stress management and sleep and healthy exercise and all those things can be helpful. But I can't really in good conscience recommend popping 3 cloves of raw garlic per day. I think that could disrupt your life even more so than the coronavirus. So appreciate the question. Hope that's helpful. Benny. We have a listener question from Benny this week. Benny sent me a question about yoga on Instagram, and the question is, Lucas, how do I learn full lotus? I've been trying to jam my legs into full lotus, but I feel like I'm just hurting my knees. Full lotus, of course, is the quintessential meditation position, the stereotypical meditation position. And the deal with full lotus is it requires quite a bit of hip mobility, but also quite a bit of ankle mobility. And unfortunately, it's not a very good developmental pose. It's a pose that demonstrates flexibility rather than develops flexibility. The differences between those two are really important distinctions to make. There's a bunch of poses in yoga that are good for showing that you're flexible, but not good for building flexibility. So full lotus is one of those poses. If you jam your legs into full lotus, well, I should say if you crank your legs into full lotus and just sit there, it's not so helpful for actually opening up your hips or your ankles. It's probably more effective for opening your ankles, actually. And so, Benny, what you'd like to work on for full lotus pose, the most effective series that I know comes from the Ashtanga series, and it's Marichyasana, A, B, C, and D. These miserable half lotus variation poses with twists and things like that are really, really effective. I don't know the name. So Marichyasana means like King Marichi pose or something like that. There's not a very good transliteration, but if you look up on the internet, Marichyasana, A, B, C, and D, you'll find that series, and this is the most effective series I've found for opening your hips asymmetrically and also opening your ankles, and it's developmental, meaning if you just practice those, it'll lead you towards the full lotus. Hope that's helpful.
This week's iTunes review is by Jay Pulak. Jay Pulak says, "This is the only podcast I listen to faithfully. It's chock full of useful, up-to-date information to help make better choices. It's always apparent that Lucas has done the homework to understand his weekly topics and has the best guests. Thanks for making your show available to everyone." Congratulations, Jay Pulak. You have won a yoga trapeze. Email us at podcast@yogabody.com and we'll ship it to you.
If you're a regular Yoga Talk Show listener, you'll definitely want to get on my email list. Go to yogabody.com/sign me up. When you enter your email address there, we always have free giveaways every month. Yoga straps, water bottles, discounts in our shop, and all kinds of other things. When you sign up at yogabody.com/sign me up, I'll send you just one email a week with updates about the show, special offers, new courses, and valuable information that I think you'll find useful. So go to yogabody.com/sign me up to claim your free prize now.